This video was brought to you by Ground News. Justin Trudeau is not having a good time at the moment. His approval ratings have been in the red for the past 4 years, and his Liberal Party has polled behind the Conservatives for the past 3. Unfortunately for Trudeau, in the past few weeks or so, things seem to have got even worse. According to the most recent polling from Angus Reid, in December his net approval rating hit an all-time low of -40, while the most recent polling from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation suggests that the Liberals are now 21 points behind the Conservatives, up from 17 points in mid-November, putting them on track to win just 50 seats in the next election under Canada's first-past-the-post electoral system. And things actually came to a head on Monday, when Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland suddenly resigned, the government admitted that the deficit was 50% larger than expected, and Trudeau lost yet another by-election, all in just one day, putting renewed pressure on him to either resign or call an election. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why Trudeau is so unpopular, this new crisis, and what might happen next. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So before we get into this week's events, you need a bit of context. Trudeau's approval ratings have been declining pretty steadily for the past 4 years, and he's now one of the most unpopular politicians in the world. Now, there are a whole load of reasons that Trudeau's poll numbers have declined, including incumbency fatigue — Trudeau has been in power for nearly a decade now — and inflation, which has been politically toxic for governments across the globe. However, there are also 2 big Canada-specific factors that have really hurt him: Canada's housing crisis and immigration. Since Trudeau took over in 2015, house prices have risen by nearly 70%, the steepest rise among any similar-sized OECD countries. The average Canadian house now costs over 700,000 Canadian dollars, and the ratio between median house price and median wages has increased from 3 in the 90s to nearly 6 today, rising to 9 in Toronto and 12 in Vancouver. This is in part because the number of homes has barely kept pace with Canada's population, which takes us nicely onto the second issue: immigration. Immigration into the country has soared in recent years, in part due to an increase in permanent residents, but mainly due to a larger increase in the non-permanent resident population, which now stands at about 3 million people, or 7.3% of Canada's total. This influx has also masked a severe economic crisis. While at first glance it looks like the Canadian economy has fared remarkably well post-pandemic, with GDP growing faster than every other G7 country apart from the US, that's only because of high levels of immigration, and Canada's GDP per capita has actually fallen for the past 2 years, and is now down to 2014 level. While Canadians are generally pretty pro-immigrant, this strain on Canada's housing market, plus a widespread sense that temporary workers are suppressing wages, means that Canadians now want less migration into the country. In response, Trudeau has promised to increase home building and reduce immigration, mainly by reducing the number of international students and foreign worker visas. But neither policy has really worked. The annual home building rate is still running at less than half of Trudeau's new target, and immigration is still running at a record rate. And these issues have hurt Trudeau with both right-leaning Canadians, who were already irked by Trudeau's focus on identity politics and green policies, like the infamous carbon tax, but also with left-leaning Canadians, who see the property crisis as a way of entrenching inequality and the temporary worker scheme as a way of suppressing low-skilled wages. You get the idea then. Trudeau has been in trouble for a while now. But unfortunately for the Liberals, things have been getting a fair bit worse over the past month and a half or so. It all started in November, when Donald Trump announced his plan to impose 25% tariffs on Canada, and joked that Canada should become the 51st state of America, with Trudeau as governor. Then there was a strike by the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, which ended with the government basically ordering the union back to work. And then Trudeau's attempts to essentially buy off voters backfired spectacularly. On Saturday, Trudeau announced a 2-month Christmas tax holiday on items like beer, wine, and candy, and is currently pushing for a $250 rebate to any Canadian who earned less than $150,000 in 2023. While you might think that these sort of policies might make Trudeau popular, polling from Ledger found that 70% of voters thought it was electioneering, while only a third thought that either measure would actually help their personal finances in any meaningful way. And it also sparked a disagreement with his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who suddenly resigned on Monday, the day after Housing Minister Sean Fraser did the same thing. In her resignation letter, Freeland stated that Trudeau had requested that she resign as finance minister on Friday, and seemed to imply that she didn't think Trudeau would be able to handle Trump. Freeland also probably resigned because she was due to deliver some bad news later that day. According to a finance ministry readout on Monday afternoon, in the last fiscal year, the national deficit ballooned to $61.9 billion, 50% more than expected, and well above the government's target of $40 billion. This also cast yet more doubt on the prudence of Trudeau's recent giveaways, which together cost the Canadian taxpayer $6 billion. And then, to top it all off, on Monday evening, the votes were counted, and it was announced that the Conservatives had flipped a seat in the by-election in British Columbia, his third by-election loss in a previously safe Liberal seat this year alone. Anyway, so what happens next? Well, there's been a fair bit of speculation about Trudeau resigning, but at the moment, this does feel unlikely, at least in the immediate future. Trudeau refused to step down after his previous by-election losses and has already appointed Dominic LeBlanc as his finance minister, although the role of deputy prime minister does remain vacant. On top of that, it'll be tough for the Liberals to squeeze out a leadership election before the next general election, which is due for October at the latest. And prospective leadership candidates would probably want to keep their powder dry for 2029, rather than take an inevitable drubbing this year. And Trudeau could be forced to call an election anyway, if the Canadian Parliament passes a no-confidence motion against his minority government. Both the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois have said that Trudeau should dissolve Parliament and call an election in early 2025, while the NDP's leader also called on Trudeau to resign, but conspicuously said that he would not vote to topple his Liberal government, saying that all options are on the table. The Conservatives and the Bloc have consistently voted for any no-confidence motion put to the House, but the NDP have always bailed Trudeau out, which is crucial because the opposition parties don't have a majority without NDP support. Nonetheless, even if Trudeau can hold on, he's only delaying the inevitable defeat, and the real question looks like how bad it's going to be. That's certainly going to be worth paying attention to. And keeping up with the news is made much easier thanks to Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. They pull in stories from all over the world and organize them by story, with each coming with its own quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For instance, take the story of Freeland's resignation. Right away, you can see that the story had 381 outlets reporting on it. Of those, 37% lean left, while 40% lean right. You can also swipe through the headlines to see just how different some of the reporting can be based on these biases, with the left tending to focus on the challenge this poses for Trudeau going forward, while the right considers the disagreement between Freeland and Trudeau over so-called political gimmicks. One of my favourite features, though, is the My News bias. It's basically a fitness tracker, but for the news. It tracks my reading habits over time, my trends in political bias, the specific news outlets I read the most, and even the specific topics I gravitate towards. And it's been really helpful in minimizing my own personal blind spots. Now, as an independent news outlet, we're passionate about informing our viewers about bias and helping them to understand how it affects the media they consume. And Ground News is very effective at this, showing you just how each side of the political divide covers every story you read online. And best of all, we're currently offering viewers 50% off Ground's Vantage plan, which includes access to all of their amazing features, like their blind spot feed. This is their biggest discount of the year, so go to ground.news/TLDR, scan the QR code on screen, or use the link in the video description to subscribe today.